Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today, and I'm going to be doing my end of the year NFL award picks. So, the NFL regular season has ended, and I'm going to be giving my updated picks for who should win all the major awards. And without further ado, really, I am going to be getting into it. So, to start off with, I'm going to cover uh, the Rookie of the Year positions. First, the Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think my preseason pick was Josh Allen of the Jaguars. My pick now is Nick Bosa of the San Francisco 49ers. He had 9 sacks this year in his rookie year. I really didn't expect much of him, hadn't heard much about him going into the season, but he's really helped transform the San Francisco defense to be one of the best in the NFL. They also finished with a 13-3 record, which is well above I know what I predicted, along with what a lot of other people predicted. Um, Overall, they're just a really impressive defense, and I think there's something crazy like 8 or 9 of their starters on defense are 25 years of age or younger. So that's crazy for what the repercussions would be going forward for the next couple of years of how dominant that they could possibly be. So yeah, I definitely was impressed by Nick Bosa, and he's my pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year. For Offensive Rookie of the Year, preseason I picked Josh Jacobs, and now I'm picking Josh Jacobs too. Gardner Minshew and Kyler Murray, I give you my warmest regards, but I think they were at times inconsistent and fell flat enough, and I think Josh Jacobs really had an impressive season. He rushed for about 1,100 yards, and he had 7 rushing touchdowns, and I think he was a really good force for this Oakland offense, and he helped Derek Carr out a bit, and although they only finished at 7-9, I feel really good about the promising rookie year that Josh Jacobs had, and I think he has a really bright future ahead of him. As for Executive of the Year, I picked Eric DeCosta of the Ravens. Uh, the Ravens had a very impressive year as far as personnel when you think about what they went through. They're 14-2, first of all, so that definitely reflects well on him. He brought in Earl Thomas and Mark Ingram, and he drafted Hollywood Brown, who are all really good pickups or just draft picks this year. Mark Ingram had a 1,000-yard year. Earl Thomas played really well. Hollywood Brown had a good rookie season. And then also, I think when you just think about like all the players that this team lost and that they still did well, it's crazy. So on defense or on offense last year, they lost their quarterback who started 10 games in Flacco. Now, of course, Lamar took over, so it's not really like they lost Flacco. That it wasn't that big of a deal that they lost him, but it's still notable that the guy that was started majority of your games last year and all of your games for like the past 10 years left. That's a big deal. Besides that, they on offense they also lost their 2 starting receivers in John Brown and Michael Crabtree, and their starting tight end in Max Williams. That's a lot to lose on offense, but you can say like, well, none of those players were downright spectacular necessarily. But when you consider that they have a new starting tight end, they have new starting wide receivers, they have a new quarterback, that's all pretty impressive. And then also on defense, they lost starters in Zadarius Smith, C.J. Mosley, Terrell Suggs, and Eric Weddle. Those are last year. Those were arguably their 4 best defensive players, and they lost all of them. And basically said, okay, we're going to replace those 4 guys, 4 starters, 4 above-average starters. We're going to replace all of them with Earl Thomas, and the rest are going to be basically internal developed players who are going to come up and start in their place. And you got a lot of development from guys like Matthew Judon, Patrick Owansar. He had a pretty underrated but good season. Those 2 guys really stepped up big and were really useful in replacing some of those guys that left. And just everybody in general kind of came together collectively and did a good job of helping replace what had been going on. So Eric DeCosta for Executive of the Year. Coach of the Year, Kyle Shanahan. I considered Pete Carroll and I considered John Harbaugh, but because I gave Executive of the Year to the Ravens, it felt kind of selfish to give Coach of the Year to the Ravens too, especially when they were expected to be around 10-6 and they finished at 14-2. And the Seahawks last year they were 10-6 and they finished 11-5. I would have considered it more if the Seahawks would have finished at like 13-3, like they were on track to a couple weeks ago. But because they stumbled late in the year, I'm not going to give it to Carroll because 11-5 really isn't that much better than 10-6. But I predicted the 49ers to be 6-10 this year, and they were 13-3. And Kyle Shanahan had a fantastic offense and defense, and for those reasons, I just gotta tip my cap and say, Kyle Shanahan, it's you. You did it. You are the coach of the year, hands down. They also got the 1 seed in the NFC throughout the playoffs, so that's really cool as well. Comeback player of the year, I kind of debated a couple here, but I think the one that I ended up picking is a pretty good one. It's Ryan Tannehill of the Titans. Now, he did technically play last year, but he was out all of 2017. And last year he was shaky and he didn't play the entire year and he was pretty bad. But this year was a really good return to form for him. He started 7 games in Tennessee and they got up to 9-7 after a 4-5 start, which would imply that he was 5-2 in the games that he started, which is a pretty good record. Also, he threw 17 touchdowns to 6 interceptions this year, which is a really good clip. And he just led this team to a playoff berth, which most people didn't think that they were going to be capable of early in the season. So for those reasons, I picked Tannehill as my comeback player of the year. Now getting into the really serious awards: Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and MVP. For Offensive Player of the Year, I have Russell Wilson. He had a really good season. He had 31 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He rushed for 3 touchdowns, and his team finished 11-5. I think again he would have been higher, but their record kind of fell off. When they were, I think when they were like, let's see here, there was a point when they were like 11-3, and I was like, wow, if they finished 13-3, like he could be MVP, but they fell off a little bit at the end, and his stats are just a little less flashy than somebody else. So for that reason, sometimes I feel like Offensive Player of the Year is kind of just like runner-up MVP, and that's sort of what I'm using it as this year, and then I'm giving it to Russell Wilson because I'm not giving him MVP, but he definitely had one of his best years, and the offense was there. This team overall is very reliant on him saving them a lot of different games. But again, they were 10-6 last year, and they're only 11-5 this year. So it's not like they necessarily like shocked expectations. Defensive Player of the Year, I have Shaq Barrett. I debated doing Stephon Gilmore or somebody else or somebody on San Fran, but the way I saw it, it's kind of like when you look at Stephon Gilmore, yes, he had a great year, but he also has a ton of great defensive players around him that really contributed to that team being awesome. Besides him, they had a great secondary of the McCourty brothers, Jason McCourty and Devin McCourty. They also had Patrick Chung and Duron Harmon, and I think a guy named J.C. Jones and another guy in the secondary that's pretty good that I can't remember right now. But overall, they had like the best secondary in football, and so I think like yes, Stephon Gilmore was the best part of that secondary, but he really benefited from having a lot of other talent around him. Because normally when you're a good corner, what teams do is they just don't throw to your side of the field. But because the rest of the secondary was so good, teams were forced to throw to Stephon Gilmore a lot more than they normally would. So I feel like his gaudy interception numbers being 6 is a lot more telling that he was just getting a lot more balls thrown his way. And yes, he performed extremely well, but I think in a normal year, with less of a secondary around him, his stats wouldn't have been nearly as gaudy. And so overall, I guess I'm saying I think he definitely benefited from his teammates being really good along with his own production. Whereas Shaq Barrett led the league with 19.5 sacks. Nobody saw this coming. It was an amazing year for him. Buccaneers don't have a great defense in general, so his performance is even more impressive. And yeah, I was just dumbfounded by him getting 19.5 sacks. That's really awesome. Lastly, MVP, I'm giving it to Lamar Jackson. There's no mystery here. He finished the year with 36 passing touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Along with that, he rushed for 1,200 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. That's like the most rushing yards by a quarterback ever, which is pretty crazy. and he was something like fifth or sixth in the league in rushing, which is crazy because like all the other top like 15 people are running backs. So for him to be like fifth among everybody in the league is nuts. Also, 7 rushing touchdowns is really good. Kind of can go underrated, but that's amazing. And I wasn't sold on this guy earlier in the year, which is crazy because I myself am a huge Ravens fan. But he just gave me a lot of, and he still does actually give me a lot of reminiscence of basically like a better Robert Griffin. And I'm just scared that once he sustains one injury, he's not going to be the same. But you can't live your whole life waiting for something bad to happen. So I'm just going to roll with it. Lamar for MVP. He deserves it. The team is 14-2, which is astounding. A lot of it because of Lamar, so I think he deserves it. And that's all I got. Hope you guys enjoyed my awards picks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.